welcome guys back to my channel. Today's a little bit more of a sit down formal chit chat. I haven't done one of these in such a long time. If you're new to my channel and this is the first video you're seeing with me, wow, what a way to say hi. My name's Katie. I'm a 29-year-old woman about to turn 30 in a couple of months, and I just got diagnosed with ADHD. However, this is not my normal content. Usually I create plus size fashion reviews and hauls and lifestyle vlogs, so if that's up your alley, then make sure to subscribe. I do also chat all things mental health. I have a really open heart and an open mind about it. I just want to put a disclaimer out there that this is not going to be in any way medical advice. I know that you guys will already know that, but I just have to say, if you have any questions, queries or concerns, please consult a professional. I am not a professional. I consult a bunch of professionals myself, and I will get more into that later in the video. Every single person's journey is so unique and so different. So take from my experience what you will. I can only assume that you're here for advice on your own ADHD journey or a loved one. So I hope that there are some little bits of information in this video that will help you on that. I think a great place to start on my journey, which is literally the first inkling that I had ADHD, was during COVID, which is, you know, not an unusual experience. It seems that a lot of people had time to sit with their thoughts and had their whole life switched upside down, which was true for myself, but I also just had a new baby as well. Now, I had my last baby, which was my second baby boy, and I had been diagnosed with postnatal depression and anxiety. And I had been experiencing a bunch of emotion. These feelings were only around for a few months, which, you know, aligns with all the hormonal changes in my body, having been a new mum who was breastfeeding and, you know, healing from birth. Much like everyone else, had downloaded TikTok as well, and was just, you know, uploading content as a creator, doing my research, enjoying other creators' content, and somehow the algorithm knew to spew out some information to me about ADHD and a disorder called BPD. I'll have all the definitions on the screen, but the two kind of started at the same time being funneled my way, and I, after a couple of months of maybe seeing content like that, of going, that's literally like me. That is me as a person. You know, really started to open my eyes to this thing that I'd never heard of, and I decided to start Googling, of course, like most of us do. And I filled out some medical forms online, which were, you know, properly done through, I'm in Australia, so it was through an Australian website, but I'm sure you could also find the same in your country. So I only actually matched that ADHD test at about 30 or 40%. I can't quite remember which it was. I tested for a bunch of different things, FYI, but that didn't really match to what I was going through. So I was like, okay, so I don't have ADHD clearly, but at the bottom of that test result, it had suggested BPD and a few other tests to take as well. And I'm really thankful it did, because obviously that then led me on the path to where I was about to go. And I took the test for BPD and ranked 9 out of 10 or 90% out of 100. So that was the start of my journey to realize, okay, I really need to be pursuing something, whether it's this diagnosis, an ADHD diagnosis, some other diagnosis. I needed to start that journey. And as you would know, if you have ADHD or you're on the path to ADHD, you will understand that hurdles and booking in appointments and, you know, taking that next step of action is extremely hard, or at least it was for me. So I started by Googling psychologists, because I didn't really know what I was about to get diagnosed with, and I just sort of thought, well, this is probably the first point of action. And I kept finding that a lot of psychologist books were shut or full, because again, the big TikTok, I guess, movement had brought a lot of people into the same questions, which is fantastic, because I really do believe that so many people are undiagnosed. That leads me onto a little side tangent that I personally believe that if you feel that you have ADHD or a certain diagnosis and you've done your research and, you know, you have all of the reasoning why, don't doubt yourself. You know, give yourself the backing that you deserve. I didn't back myself. I did to an extent, but in another extent I kept undermining, I guess, my value in what I was feeling, because it wasn't accredited or professionally diagnosed, and that can often be ridiculed online, and I feel that a lot of people are gatekeeping the community. And while I do think it's really important that we don't just all use terms here, there and everywhere that don't apply, and it can belittle the community when it's taken for granted, there are also circumstances where you can't afford to necessarily seek that medical advice. You can't necessarily get on the books straight away for those people, or you just are so bogged down in those hurdles and that feeling that it can be really hard to take action. So be kind on yourself, and honestly start by writing down your experiences. That's what I did. I got a notes app on my phone, wrote down everything that I could think of from childhood to adulthood, and particularly what those looked like in my life. Not just the medical term, but the actual way that that evolves into my life in everyday circumstances and situations. I ended up having a gigantic list, but it was super duper helpful. So after countless hours of looking online for, psychologists and calling up different surgeries and all the places to find people, I just kept saying, please add me to the cancellation list. Call me if someone cancels. It's always in those dire moments, I feel like, that we finally seek that help, because we lose that little bit of hope that we're normal, or at least in my case, that I was normal, and that, I was going to have a bright future. That's really where it got to for me. I felt like life was just so hard, and it sounds so negative and pessimistic to say that, but when you're in those feelings and in those times, it can feel extremely isolating, but don't give up hope. I promise there is hope. So I actually contacted, I think it was about 20 different places. A ton of them just said, sorry, we don't put you on cancellation lists, and others were open to it. And it actually happened that a few hours later, I got a phone call back from my current psychologist, who was a self-run kind of business, not through like a surgery or anywhere like that. And she was like, I actually just this week dropped a client so I can fit you in. So you just never know what opportunities may arise. Honestly, keep putting yourself out there. I know it can be really disheartening. And I also want to say that this is not my first psychologist in my life that I've ever seen. The first psychologist I ever saw, we just didn't really blend, we didn't click, so I didn't continue to see her all those years ago. But I promise you, there are ones out there, and it can feel like a wait, like a lifetime wait for them, but it's worth it when you find the right one. The best way to find them for me personally was typing in psychologist near me, or psychologist and then the city that you're in. And don't forget too that there are surgeries / medical professionals who are open to Skype calling and further distance away in contacting you. So don't give up the option of that as well. If you're in an area or a small town that you're like, I've literally explored all options, try and seek elsewhere. So I finally found a psychologist who was happy to take me, and she advised that I needed a mental health care plan if I didn't want to be charged the full price, which I was trying to avoid. So I did go to the doctor and got on a mental health care plan, definitely not my first. And I reached back out to my psychologist, and I obviously gave my psychologist details to my GP. Another big one was, that people come up against is their GP and the hurdles to convincing them to getting that referral to see a psychologist. Thankfully, I've seen my GP for a number of years, and she knows my experience from the postpartum depression and anxiety, and then all of my, life history as well. I've seen her for a few years now, and she's very up to date with that. So I'm very lucky and thankful that I have her, and she supports me in that journey as well. So that was the first hurdle that was really relatively easy to tell her my experience, and she understood. So once I did that, I then booked in my first psychologist appointment, which was just, your run-of-the-mill, get everything out, your life story. And then on the second appointment, we finally started to discuss BPD. And I should mention too that when I was searching for my psychologist, I particularly searched for BPD and DBT therapy because I wanted to have someone who specialized in that, and she did. So we started to discuss the fact that I may, or at least I'm showing symptoms of BPD, and I had mentioned to her that I also had ADHD kind of in the back of my head, but I felt that BPD was more aligned as a whole sort of picture. And she agreed at that time that yes, it sounded like that. And she actually runs this therapy group within DBT, which is a group, and it's based on skills and modules that you go through and essentially, learn how to process those emotionally heightened situations that some people find easy and others don't. I completed one whole, what's it called? Not semester, but like course, I guess you could say. So I did 3 modules within that course. And then unfortunately, my life flipped upside down where my kids are now home more. So I actually can't attend those classes anymore because it runs for 2 hours. But even in just completing that course once, because I did want to do it a whole time again, just to really let that sink in, it did really give me some tools to help me function in that emotional turmoil that can very quickly erupt. And she explained a lot about, how the brain works and acting off emotion with your front part of your brain. Let's talk about my symptoms for what led me to believe that I had ADHD or BPD. Okay, so I've just pulled up my ADHD symptoms list. Now this was what I was jotting down through the entire time that I was having an experience, or I had a memory of something that would happen, so that I could have this before going to any medical professional, so that I could have the backing in case I needed it. And I have it in 2 categories. So I had the in childhood and then in adulthood. So in childhood, I had leg fidgeting, hands distracted with, painting. I don't know if you guys ever did this in school, but the whiteout, I would always be doing French manicures for myself. Every page in any book had some kind of drawing or scribble on it. I was distracted very easily, and I also distracted others very easily. This was one that was commonly reported for me in my term reviews or, semester reviews, whenever you'd have those report cards sent out. Katie is such a bubbly, bright person, but she needs to work on distracting others. Interrupting conversations, never knowing when it's my turn to talk. And I also find as well that, I've had relationships or friendships throughout my life that has ended because they have seen me as someone who's very selfish, which I honestly felt so hurt by when I discovered this. My high school best friend, I met up with her years later to discuss what had happened, and she was like, oh, everything was about you. And I'm like, that makes so much sense to me now, because the way that I relate to people or connect to people and try and form friendships, which if you're like me, you'll know exactly what I mean, but I relate to people through stories and experiences of my own to connect to them and to show, I guess, empathy or whatever the terminology is. I do that to try and connect with someone and be like, oh my God, same, that's just like me, we're like the same person, oh my God, kind of thing. And that can be deemed from the other way, like one-upping people or trying to take the light away from other people, or not letting other people talk and not letting them have their own experience without it relating to you. And that was a big one for me. That was like, holy crap, that was never my intention. And I still do it to this day. I'm honestly trying to be conscious of it in all areas of my life, but it's very, very hard to do when it's your natural instinct to do something like that. So I'd be very open to hearing anyone's experience with that particular, well, not issue necessarily for you, but issue for me. In childhood, I was very bossy. I hated any kind of exam or pressures because I couldn't retain that information. I would just get so clouded. Even though I knew the answers, I could never translate that. Then I changed jobs a lot. I could never have one goal/ambition in life. It was just more I know I have to do this thing to survive in society. I know I need to enjoy what I do, otherwise I'm not going to do it, and I could never think of what I wanted to do. Still struggle with that to this day. Sporty and not very academic, which, I was academic in a sense that I was very smart and street smart, but not very book smart, and I loved athletics, anything that I could get out and about and do. And I was also extremely emotional, and unfortunately it's just something you can't control. Well, at least it wasn't for me. So yeah, commented on by teachers and family a lot that I was highly emotional. I couldn't really take criticism very well. Then in adulthood, my symptoms are often having a feeling of something to remember, but I can't pinpoint what it is. So it's like when you lose your wallet and you're on that anxiety / I know I'm meant to be doing something, but I can't quite figure out what that is. That is the feeling majority of the time that I would be experiencing. Very easily distracted. I get into a task and then I see something else and I go, oh, because I won't remember to do this later, I'll do that now. And yeah, the memory one is a huge one for me. Like, that was my biggest reason for looking into it. Was I was Googling early onset dementia because I just couldn't figure out why I couldn't retain information. I was missing appointments, which was not like me. And, you know, post kids was when my downfall happened, because I had so many other people who were reliant on me being the responsible adult and, you know, showing up, doing things that I was supposed to be doing, and I couldn't even be accountable for myself anymore. It was this bizarre breakdown for me that just suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks, and I realized how out of control I was, or at least I felt out of control of my life and my choices and my motivation and my memory, and there was just a spiral. It was happening really quickly. I often feel lazy or deterred from starting tasks that take energy, but then on the flip side of that, I can't sit still, and I always have something or a project that I want to do, or a new hobby that I want to start, or something has inspired me, or I've seen a video and then I'm like, I'm gonna do that tomorrow or right now. Like, you know, there's really an urgency behind everything that I want to do, and I want to try and do everything so that I can be a master of all trades. I avoid work tasks and things that people expect of me. So, you know, I will hustle as hard as I can for myself, but as soon as someone else is expecting something of me, or something is set in concrete with a deadline, I do not thrive. Like, it's almost like I have this noose around my neck and I'm just like, the pressure is there to perform, and I'm scared that I won't perform, so I just don't do it. Or at least I leave it to the last minute till I have to do it, and then of course it doesn't turn out to be as good as I'd like because I didn't spend the time in it. Not a detail-oriented person, and keep making small errors and rush through tasks. This one was a huge one for me, and the reason why I couldn't hold down an everyday job and still struggle with emails with brands and people that I work with and things like that, because I will forget that their email exists, or I'll forget that I didn't reply to it. And, you know, I have a process in place where I star them and favorite them so that I can come back and reply, but it gets chaotic sometimes that I just forget. And then the other thing is, obviously with that, is the detail within the email. I'll often skip over text, or in the rush I'll just be like, oh yeah, I get a rough idea of what they're saying, so I'll reply, or I'll forget to add attachments, and then I kind of double the workload because I'm not spending the time on it. Even when I think I'm spending the time and I go, okay, let's sit down and actually focus on this task so we don't muck it up, I still somehow muck it up. And I honestly still don't understand how that happens. The only way I can explain this next one is like feeling cloudy in a general sense of life. I have, you know, passions, of course, but I have no like ambition or specific direction that I'm like, that is where I'm going. Sometimes, you know, it will strike me like the need to or desire to do something, or a passion will be like, okay, I'm really passionate about this, but I find it hard deciphering what's something that is just a temporary thing that I'm obsessing over, and what is something that I actually want to make a life of and include in my everyday life. Because I enjoy so many things, and because I try and make the most out of my life, I do things that I love all the time in different areas and different things, and it's picking one thing or a couple of things because of time and having kids to then pursue that to continue on to do. And yeah, just a personality thing as well. Like, how do you know who you are as a person when I place my worth and my enjoyment on activities that I can achieve and am good at? It's a mind fuck. So because of my heightened emotions, I can be really quick to be angry and spiral into such negative thoughts, and just in general feel low mood. I can't really explain it unless I'm in it, and it takes my, you know, therapy skills and time away from whatever is triggering me, whether that's noise, sounds, sometimes my kids trigger me, which is a hard one because I can't really escape it. The only way I can explain that is kind of like when you're hangry is kind of like what I get like, but it's triggered by being overstimulated. Another big one for me in my journey has been my eating disorders, so trigger warning for this section. I either eat a lot at one time because I'm starving because I've forgotten to eat, or I eat nothing because I've forgotten to eat, and it's just a round vicious cycle, which then led me to like binge eating disorder, and which is, again, can be quite common with ADHD. So that's something that I didn't know was associated with ADHD at all. Highly emotional in every aspect of my life. Anything triggers me, even ads on the TV, or, you know, I have what I consider to be quite a high level of empathy. I can absolutely tell if someone has bad intentions, and I can also pick up on, you know, their emotions as well, and they play a big impact on my emotions. So being around particular people can be extremely triggering for me with my symptoms as well. So I have to be super careful with who I am around, and I'm sure it's the same vice versa with people who have ADHD with me as well. Like, I can be very triggered and emotionally erratic as well, which I'm sure mustn't be nice from the other way. This one's another big one. Reward systems are not something that works for me, or at least big rewards. So often people will hold down a day job that pays them well because they know that the money's good, and even though the job isn't what they love to do, or it's something that they're not interested in, they're like, it pays really well, so I can continue to put up with this. And because they know that their goal is, you know, to earn X amount, or to get a house, or a car, or they know that that is the key to their next goal. You know, a good one is saving for a family holiday every year, or whatever that may be. Those incentives, while they are huge and exciting, if they're too far apart, for me, it's not incentive enough to make me do the rigmarole of something that I'm not passionate about or I don't enjoy. So waking up every day to a job that I don't like, it's not enough. You could be paying me $1 million to go to that job, and I'd probably agree to it for like the first 6 months, but after that I'd be like, it's just not worth it for me. That's why I love what I do now. You know, I am on the least money I've ever earned in my life, but I'm also the happiest in terms of the fulfillment that I get from my job. And it's the most sustainable lifestyle that I've ever lived. And that is honestly kudos to me being in tune, knowing who I am, and the positive side of ADHD, and learning that about myself has really allowed me the key to knowing what I value and what I don't value. Indecisiveness, I feel like that's a really common knowledge one. I don't listen well to people, even though my intention is to be listening. I'm often having a thought in that conversation, and then I go, I don't want to forget this because this is going to be a key thing to either helping this person or to the story or to connecting deeper. And then I'll be like, remember it. And the whole time I'm like, remember it. And then I get to go to that point of saying it and I've forgotten it. And then I'm like, shit, I've forgotten it and I wasn't listening. So it's just like this big whirlwind of like, I should have been listening just in the first place and not worried about saying that. But your brain in that moment is just like, trying to do the best and the most in the situation. And the last one I had on the list was lack in friendships, because I forget to communicate with them, I forget they exist, and I also forget that it's a two-way street. This is a huge one, and to be honest with you, I still don't have a lot of friends, and it's sad to say that, but I also know why now, and I feel like that's a really powerful step in my journey. And I also am at a place of I don't need to be someone that I'm not. And for so many years, I felt that I had to be a certain person. Before I even knew I had ADHD, I used to think that I had multiple personalities for different situations and I would tap into those. And now I've just learned that actually I don't need to mask. I don't need to be anything but myself. And even though I interrupt in conversations and I do have a tendency to talk about myself sometimes, that the right friend will know that the intentions of behind the reasoning of that is good and it's not coming from a malice place or an egotistical place or a narcissistic place. It's just coming from a connection and bond place, which sounds completely the opposite. I often find too that I am attracted to people who are also neurodivergent, which have either not yet been diagnosed on their discovery of diagnosis, or, you know, you just kind of connect to people who get you and understand you. And I do have a few friends in my circle who are in that same kind of bubble, and it's just comforting to know that you do have your kind of people out there. And I'm also manifesting my BFF. So we're putting that out there to the world. I should say too, I sound like I'm a really selfish friend. I promise that I'm not. Sometimes I think just in reflection, we can often focus on the negatives and why, all the things we could improve on. I would like to say that I am a hella good friend. I just sometimes get a little wrapped up in my life. So that was my very, very long, extensive list, which, as you can imagine, the psychiatrist was a little bit blown away by. So I got to the end of the module with my psychologist and I realized that it wasn't quite encompassing everything that I was experiencing, and I was still having this like urge, I feel like, to find this missing piece of myself which wasn't found with BPD. And I also want to say that you can have both diagnosed at the same time. You don't have to have one or the other. They can often be together. So I'm still not sure if I have BPD, but I definitely was more drawn to exploring the ADHD side. I still currently have my psychologist as part of my team, and I see her for general therapy sessions and also, you know, for any consults around BPD if I have any questions about that. So I'm still feeling all of these things, and she just kind of validated that for me and was like, look, I'll, you know, write you a letter, because she couldn't diagnose it being a psychologist. And I headed back to my GP to get the referral to a psychiatrist. This was the harder part to get into because there are far and few between, at least, you know, where we are. Again, a lot of Googling, a lot of calling places, putting on cancellation lists, and often finding that they have closed their books, or, you know, they would then recommend me or refer me to somewhere else, which I would then pursue. And I finally got onto a wait list, and I think it was about a 5-month wait time. For whatever reason, he doesn't believe you or doesn't diagnose you. That doesn't mean the journey is over. It just means that you need a second opinion. And thankfully, I saw him via Skype, because unfortunately I'd just been diagnosed with COVID that week, and he was very nice and did a Skype call. And the first session, I think it was about an hour long. He went through my entire history again, and I, you know, submitted him my GP letter, my psychologist letter, and we went through that list that was on my phone. We went into a lot of detail, so much so that I talked the entire session, and he was like, okay, we'll come back for session number 2, because he wanted to touch more on the BPD journey. And he also, I think, just as a general practice, doesn't like to medicate in the first session, which makes complete sense. But they are expensive sessions. So the psychiatrist cost me around $400, $450 for the initial session, and I did get Medicare rebated around about like the $150 to $180 mark. So at the end of my first session, he leaned towards the side of saying, look, I'm feeling fairly confident that we are going to be diagnosing you with ADHD, but I just want to be going over a few more things. And because I'd had my history of depression in my younger years, early adulthood, late childhood, I had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, which I now think was ADHD symptoms. So then I think it was about a 2-week wait, and he asked me in that 2-week period to fill out lots of different forms which were online. We got to the second appointment where he finally diagnosed me with ADHD, and he also is not sure if I have BPD or not, because obviously that takes a lot more exploration and seeing how we go with the meds and all of that stuff. But at this point, he's pretty confident I don't, and mostly have ADHD, or have ADHD, sorry, and then maybe have BPD. So he prescribed me with Vyvance, which was a long-acting amphetamine-based ADHD drug. Now, this is again going to be a very personal experience, personal prescription, and I don't want to be recommending any kind of thing to anybody because I'm not a professional. I started on that with a very low dose. I think it was about 20 milligrams. I can't remember if it was 10 or 20. I think it was 20. And I was taking that once in the morning, and it was supposed to last through the evening. He had told me that I can increase in 3 days' time if I wasn't seeing any results. To 40, I think it was, and then if I didn't see any results, 3 days again to up it to 60. So I eventually got to 60 milligrams after I think it was 9 days or so. I was finding very minimal changes to the things that I thought were supposed to change, such as, the motivation, lack of memory, all of these things, and also just the hurdles for things, the anxiety, a bunch of things that I mentioned and listed off in that list, I wasn't noticing much change in, and my mood, etc. But I persisted and I kept going, and I've been on that now for almost 6 weeks, maybe 7. Today I had my 3rd consult with my psychiatrist, and we have discussed all of this and my symptoms, and we've gone back over what those initial symptoms were and how they look now, and he agrees that we haven't really had much change positively. We've had a lot of negative effects from it, the most severe one being a significant crash that I'm having in the afternoon off this medication. We have now switched my medication to a short-acting medication, to dexamphetamine, I think that's what it's called. Or maybe it's just Dex, I can't remember. It's a longer name, but it's just Dex. That's how I know it's Dex. I'm yet to start this. I'm starting it tomorrow, and I'm hoping that it's going to help me avoid that crash in the afternoon. At first, I'm just going to be taking 2 a day, like 1 in the morning and then 1 midday. But he was saying eventually, if we're not noticing that helping in the afternoon, then we can take a 3rd one in the afternoon. So that has brought you up to date to where I am currently. What a long video. I'm so sorry I've literally chatted your ear off, but it's so personal, the experience, and for me to have some kind of resource like this on the internet would have been so helpful on my journey. As a whole, right now I'm feeling positive still, I'm feeling hopeful, and I do want to say that while this video has spoken and touched on a lot of negatives, I just have to say how many positives there are that come from having this knowledge of knowing I have ADHD. I feel honestly like it's a piece of the puzzle that was missing, and for me at least it feels like I can finally accept this part of my life and really hone into my positives from it. So if you're in this situation where you're starting out your journey and you don't know if you should be taking it anywhere, or you have concerns, then the worst that can happen is you raise these with a GP, or if you have a psychologist or anyone like that. Don't be afraid to bring it up. The worst that can happen is you find that it's a dead end, or it's not the answer that you're looking for. The reason I ended up going in to get my diagnosis and not just, I guess, understanding that that's just who I am, was because it was starting to really impede on my life and affect who I was as a person and the parent that I want to be. It's one thing to laugh about forgetting things, but it's an actual issue for me when I am forgetting really important, appointments, like even one of the GP appointments that I set up for myself on this journey to getting ADHD, I forgot to go to because it was just not in my mind. I'd set an alarm reminder, for whatever reason don't remember seeing that alarm reminder, and completely missed that appointment. And that is not the first account, it's not the last. And my psychologist explained it to me that my brain's just not slotting information and storing it correctly right now. So for me, it was to the point where it was debilitating, and it was a disability, or is a disability. to going about my everyday life, which is why it was so important to get medicated for me. And medication is a whole topic that, you know, is a choice that you need to decide if you would like to go down or not. For me, I have felt like I'm at my last option of, you know, I've done my DBT skills, I've tried therapy, I've tried all of that. I'm sure it's not the only thing I could try, but for me, medication felt like the right next step. So that is my life story with ADHD up until now. I'm so sorry for talking my mouth off to you. I do hope that there was some information in there that was helpful to you in your journey. And if you have any questions about ADHD, please don't be afraid to ask them in the comment section. Maybe I can create another video answering your questions. Because I did not realize how much I would talk in this video. I'm sending you so much love on whatever journey that you are on right now. Be kind to yourself, and honestly, just stick with it. It's worth it, I promise. Make sure you go down and subscribe. If you've enjoyed the video, I would love it if you could hit the thumbs up, and I'll see you very soon for another video on my channel. Bye guys.